And welcome back to the Center Square Daily. I'm your host, Greg Bishop. Now let's bring Illinois into focus with the General Assembly continuing on with spring session. They have that May 31st deadline, but a lot of policies being discussed, including the Rifle Act. And the Second Amendment community in Illinois has been very heightened alert about this particular proposal, saying it could mean fewer gun stores, fewer manufacturers, and less affordable options for gun owners. Let's go to yesterday's House Gun Violence Prevention Task Force, where the chairperson, Maura Hirschauer, brought together the sponsors and supporters of the Rifle Act, the Responsible Firearm Legislation Act, and they talked about how this bill, they say, will help cut down on gun violence. Here's the sponsor of the measure, State Representative Olakol.
We see roughly 6,700 people injured or killed by firearms each year at an estimated cost of $18 to $20 billion annually. These costs are shouldered by taxpayers, survivors, healthcare systems, and communities. Meanwhile, the firearm manufacturing industry does not share in these financial impacts. This legislation establishes a reasonable and targeted approach to address this imbalance. House Bill 3320 requires firearm manufacturers to contribute to a dedicated state fund as a condition of doing business in Illinois, specifically for selling, importing, or distributing firearms in our state. However, these contributions are not automatic or arbitrary. Manufacturers are required to contribute only when their products are recovered in connection with a firearm injury, death, or suicide.
Now, both sides of this debate debating the legality of it, advocates saying that they have all of the various points covered when it comes to possible constitutional challenges, while opponents of the measure say, don't go that far. They believe that it will face constitutional challenges, some of the back and forth from yesterday.
I want to make clear that this legislation is intended and succeeds in respecting our constitutional framework while simultaneously addressing a critical public safety need. It is built on tested legal principles, supported by Supreme Court precedent, and is grounded in centuries of American legal tradition. The constitutional foundation is solid and the principles are clear.
New York State Rifle and Pistol Association versus Bruin case, page 30.9, said that because any permitting scheme can be put towards abusive ends, we do not rule out constitutional challenges to shall-issue regimes where, for example, lengthy wait times in processing license applications, and specifically, or exorbitant fees deny ordinary citizens the right to public carry. Under this bill, in year two, if there's $715 million worth of liability, and we have 315 gun sales, which is actually probably half that on the retail level, we're talking about $2,269.75. That might fall under an exorbitant fee per gun under the Bruin constitutional challenge. We also have a federal law, Protection and Lawful Commerce in Arms Act.
So that added cost that the opponents are saying would be added to the cost of somebody going and buying a firearm would be exorbitant, 2,000+%. Others pegging that even higher. Here is another opponent of the Rifle Act saying that this would just make firearm ownership out of reach for an entire class of the socioeconomic ladder.
So going from 1 year set at the 50 million at 158 to the next year potentially being $9,523, that is unstable. It is not consistent. It is no way to do business, period. And it will sustainably impact Second Amendment rights. The fee increases based on more firearms that are recovered from particular manufacturers. This means that if you sell a successful firearm, you stand a higher chance of a higher fee. So the most popular, most accessible firearms that most entry-level people use end up paying the most. That's how this ends up working out.
So the debate continued there with State Representative Patrick Windhorst raising question about the added cost to firearms purchases and what that would mean for a lower income individual who may not have the funds to cover either $7,000 added to the price per one gun or $2,000 added to the price for one gun, or even, as proponents admit, could be $130 to $180 added to the price per gun. Windhorst asking an advocate of the bill how that is beneficial to lower income people who want to be able to exercise their Second Amendment rights to keep and bear arms.
Pricing poor people out of owning firearms. We've heard some of that language from different places about that concern. I think poor people don't benefit from owning firearms. I think poor people benefit from access to education, access to resources that allow them to live healthy and sustainable lives and sustains their communities. So this concern about poor people being able to or benefit from owning firearms or being put out of being able to afford firearms is, I think, we are a little bit distracted from what poor people and poor communities actually need.
Sir, I appreciate your opinion. The only way I can say it is that is a very elitist opinion, that you would say to poor people what is good for them or not good for them. Individuals without means want firearms want for hunting, want for recreation, want for self-defense, and the Second Amendment of the Constitution of the United States guarantees that to them. And it's really not our place to say, well, we think you're better off not having this thing, which is the tone of this committee.
That statement Windhorst said there at the end, that he believes the tone of the Gun Violence Prevention Committee in the Illinois House is to keep firearms out of reach from people with lesser means, riled the chairman of that committee to the point of some kind of exchange that wasn't caught on microphone. But she reiterated that the committee's purpose isn't to keep firearms out of the hands of lower income people, but to work towards addressing gun violence. Now, that measure was only for subject matter. Could it possibly come out of committee later on in session? There were a lot of questions about the bill, including the state's Department of Financial and Professional Regulation opposing the measure, saying that it would add $10 million into costs for that state agency to help enforce the law. And until that aspect's changed, they won't have that particular Pritzker agency on board, plus a whole host of other concerns there. So that's clearly an issue that we're going to be watching at thecentersquare.com. Another issue that passed the Illinois House yesterday comes from Illinois House Speaker Chris Welch. And he has a measure that would restrict detention facilities a certain distance from different types of facilities. Here he is explaining his bill on the House floor yesterday.
And what should be a place of peace and routine for that community has too often become a place of fear, disruption, trauma, and instability. And let me be clear, this bill is not about politics. It's about people. It's about the little kid at daycare who should not grow up around chaos. It's about the family in their home who should not feel like they are living next to a crisis zone. It is about the church member walking into worship who should be met with peace, not tension. It is about saying that in Illinois, we will not place detention facilities in the heart of our neighborhoods and pretend there are no consequences.
Now, Welch used the ICE facility in Broadview, Illinois, just outside of Chicago, as an example of where there's been recent chaos and the increased taxpayer cost of trying to keep the peace on the streets outside of that facility. If you recall, since October, there have been flashes of protesters against ICE having to go up against local police and state police to make their point, but police there to keep the calm, and that's caused quite a disturbance in Broadview. But Welch taking questions from the Republican floor leader, Patrick Windhorst, about the difference between what Illinois is trying to do with the Democrat-sponsored bill versus what California just got slapped down by a federal court over on the West Coast.
There was a decision in the Ninth Circuit which related to California's law. Has this, the language of this legislation been compared with California statute to ensure its constitutionality?
It's my understanding that the California law is a ban. This is a restriction. There's a difference. This talks about within 1,500 feet. This is also the Seventh Circuit and not the Ninth Circuit. I believe that what happened in the Ninth Circuit is certainly distinguishable, and it's not persuasive because we're in a vastly different circuit.
It's generally been held that the Ninth Circuit is viewed as a more progressive circuit than the Seventh, but I won't necessarily go down that road because I don't know that it will get us anywhere productive for this debate.
But Windhorst to the bill said that this continues the ongoing conflict and spurring it further between Illinois and the Trump administration when it comes to immigration policies, and Welch pushing back, saying that Illinois did not start this fight.
We see it with this bill, we've seen it with other bills in the prior year and prior General Assemblies. We are continually picking fights with the federal government. We need to take a hard look at what we're doing as a state to make sure we're fulfilling our obligations to protect our citizens and to enforce the laws, including the federal laws of our country.
I can't ignore that we're not picking a fight with the federal government. The federal government is picking a fight with us. We have states' rights. We know our rights. We know our power. And I wake up every single day saying, thank God I live in Illinois, because we're protecting the people of Illinois. That's our responsibility. And that's what I'm asking that we do here today.
Now, this measure did pass the Illinois House, now goes to the Illinois Senate. They have until May 31st to pass the bill with simple majorities. After that date, it would take supermajorities to get it to the governor's desk. But if it gets to the governor's desk, it would be stacked upon other, what critics call, migrant sanctuary policies like the Trust Act and the Way Forward Act that prohibits state and local law enforcement from cooperating with federal immigration authorities, but also a measure that they passed last year allowing for private rights of action, also known as lawsuits, against law enforcement officials for allegations of violating rights, especially if it's in coordination with immigration enforcement. It also would hold certain facilities responsible for having plans put together to allow for how to react to whether or not ICE shows up to a university or a daycare center or a hospital, for example. So a lot of moving pieces there, but something else that we'll be talking about tomorrow for Illinois in Focus with the Center Square Daily is former House Speaker Mike Madigan, who's serving time in a federal penitentiary. He's going to appeal, and we'll have people on the streets to get the latest arguments in the appeals courts, and we'll bring that story to you here with the Center Square. So get details and the newsletter at thecentersquare.com. From my studios in Central Illinois, I'm Greg Bishop, and you can join us back here Friday for more stories impacting you, the taxpayer, from all across the country, only with the Center Square Daily.